my role right now at Amplitude is this evangelist role, but the way I describe it is sort
Hmm.
of like a coach. I do a lot of
Hmm.
workshops, maybe like 150, 200 workshops a year with different companies. So
Yeah,
I've probably done a workshop at one of your companies at some point.
that's so
Um,
cool.
and so I speak with lots of teams about strategy and these types of things. And then I also like obviously help people with our product as well. So it's almost like a community
Hmm.
role in a sense, but just slightly
Yeah.
different as I do it. So that's a bit about me.
Cool. Okay. Well, that's actually kind of a perfect transition to what we want to get into today. You've done probably more of these workshops helping product teams than anyone I know. I
Maybe
wanted
Gibson
to
Biddle
start
has
by
probably
talking.
done a lot too, but yeah, it's up there.
Yeah, maybe give. Yeah, I wanted to talk to you about these workshops and where you start and how you go about diagnosing a team's product strategy. Can you talk me
Yeah.
through the kinds of questions you ask to even just get a feel for where they're at with that?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because I like to think sometimes his strategy is both picking the questions you should answer and then having plausible answers to those questions. It sounds kind of like a weird definition, but think it through for a second. So it would be
Mhm.
like if you're an early stage company, answering the question about how you're going to become $1 billion company is probably not the question you need to answer right now. If you're an early company, you might be asking questions or having perspectives or opinions on where you should learn or what particular type of what human you're trying to help and what you're trying to make possible for them in the world. So to extend that back to the workshops, a lot of times what I'm doing in the beginning when I'm listening is to hearing what's on their mind. And from there,
Mhm.
what questions do they have for me? What questions do they have among people in their team? We usually do some warm up activities where, I'll ask them to say something like, what are things their company are uniquely good at versus things that are more commonplace in their particular space or whatever. And usually from those types of activities, like just that specific question, what is something that we're stubborn about? And then what's something that's sort of generally true in our industry? Usually just even that statement can give me a sense at that point about how deeply they've thought through these particular questions and what their particular awareness is. So let
Mm.
me give you a specific example. Sometimes you have an extremely
Mhm.
overeager founder and they do an activity where I'm saying like, well, what's one thing that's kind of rare and controversial that you're stubborn about? And then what's one thing that is generally true? And they'll say, it's generally true that data will take over the world. And I'm uniquely stubborn about data. It's like, well, that's not something that it doesn't sound like you're uniquely stubborn about it. It just sounds like it's
Mhm.
like a generality that you believe. So really in the beginning, if this makes sense to anyone, I'm looking for that balance of things that they're highly opinionated about, that they're
Mm.
stubborn
Mhm.
about, that they have perspectives on, thinking about what those things are in relation to the stage of that particular business. And then I'm comparing it with the things that they just see as sort of general truisms in their particular space. So if we think of strategy as like an opinionated view of how you'll win, I'm looking for that
Mhm.
opinionated view and I'm
Yeah.
analyzing it as we go through.
Yes. Okay.
And
And
I
do
can
you
give more
find
examples if that would help people, specific examples if that would help people. I have lots of examples.
an opinionated view, I feel like can mean so many things. Like, yeah, what kinds of things or
Oh,
should early stage
let me give
companies
an
have an
example from like, yeah, let me give you an example, or I'll give you a string of examples and that will do that. So for example,
perfect,
let's
yeah.
just take Amplitude as an example. A not very
Yes.
opinionated view is that people will adopt more product ways of thinking and that there's going to be increasingly more data about experiences. Okay. So that's like a general view. Now,
Mhm.
an opinionated view, for example, in the analytics space would be something like the time frame for people, modifying their approach around a data warehouse like Snowflake is going to be accelerated from 4 years to 2 years. And in fact, the curve that you think is going to happen at triple the rate that you think it's going to happen.
Mm.
And so that's what I mean by an
Okay.
opinionated view, if that makes sense, right? So often the opinionated views are about the timing of things, or another opinionated view. For example, just coming up with different companies like,
Mhm.
so some company is saying like, well, in general, we think that no code will be shape what we're doing, so that generally people without coding experience are going to be able to maybe create applications or create things. Like no one would really debate that view. However, an
Mhm.
opinionated view in that space might be something like No, I would take it even further. Like they're going to
Hmm.
be able to do something that you didn't even expect you would be able to do with that. Like they're going to be able to rewrite domain oriented systems at 3 times the quality that teams that are trying to write code. Not that I believe that necessarily, and I'm making it up,
Hmm.
but you could see that
Yeah.
that would be an opinionated view. So that's what, and one thing you find early on is that when you're a startup, you know, you almost kind of need to drink the Kool-Aid, right? Like if you doubt
Hmm.
everything that you're doing, you're never going to make any progress to do that. But I'm still looking for like what's that unique perspective that they have. And Richard Rummelt calls that like the kernel. Like what's the
Hmm.
kernel of the
Hmm.
strategy that where cracks open the rest of the discussion in
Yes.
ways that allow you to make progress. What's
Yes.
your
Okay.
kernel?
I'm
What's
here.
Launch Awesome's kernel, Steve?
Yeah. I think for us, it's probably just this idea that I mean, I think there's a couple kernels, and maybe that's a problem, but one of them is around, you know, I think a lot of companies treat their product updates like just another thing that's going on. Product
Yeah,
updates get mixed into a newsletter around, hey, our
right.
salespeople are going to be in wherever, come meet with us. But it's like, I think it's gold. It's one of the most important things that's going on. And for you to kind of mix that into some newsletter with a bunch of other stuff that's going on, I think it's
That's a great, yeah,
just a
that's a
huge missed
wonderful
opportunity.
example. So someone, that like, there's skeptics that's be like, okay, we've reached some kind of global maximum with the quality of launch notes. Like
Hmm.
it's a human problem. It's not really a technical problem. It's sort of a intrinsic problem. Humans are bad. Like they
Hmm.
just don't like to update
Hmm.
things. And you would
Hmm.
say the kernel there would be like, we believe there's a step change in terms of value that could be
Yes.
created in this format, which maybe people have just sort of assumed is kind of a static thing that doesn't exist. So hopefully that gives people the example that of that thing. So yeah, happy to explore that more. But
Okay. Yeah. I'm here. Yeah. I'm hearing an opinionated view about like the market context, the way things are, the way that people are doing something that kind of gives way to some opportunity to better
yeah,
solve people's problems, or something like that.
and it's
What
also, but just the one thing is, what are they picking the opinionated view on? So like if the person says,
hmm,
I have an opinionated view on how to run my sales team at an early stage startup, you'd be like, I don't know, like of all the things that you could have an opinionated view on, like that's cool and all, but that's not really helping me understand your strategy because it's not. So cool.
Yeah, it sounds like what you're describing is closer to like having an opinionated view on something like what Andy Raskin calls like a change in the world. Like there's
Right.
some there's
Yeah,
some
that's a
big
great example.
shift. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's really interesting. Um yeah, what do you find tends to happen when people don't have, this strong opinionated view of what's going on? Like what happens to companies like that, or what are the outcomes for those people
Well,
tend
I
to
mean,
be?
I think that realistically, some people just sort of explore their way into that view. I mean, I think that
Mhm.
people like the idea in product that you could be a solution looking for a problem is sort of frowned upon, but I don't really think that way. Like there's some pretty good products
Mm.
that were like a solution. Someone had like a new interface. Like I asked on Twitter yesterday, like what was a feature that then was
Mhm.
disrupted, but you could also go to that idea of like, oh, I've got this new idea for like, think someone mentioned like early Trello. Like
Mhm.
Trello, like someone might have been like, there's this new type of board, and we know Kanban boards
Mhm.
exist, but you could give like the cards like superpowers and stuff. Now we could argue whether that like turned into a big product or not, but I think that the idea of like a solution looking for a problem, or like a big horizontal play that you could do, can be a really, really valuable business to do that. But I think that in general, the people who don't have some opinionated views on this just have to do like a lot more exploring and a lot more kind of false starts and spins around through this particular thing. So I think that this will sound bad, but even if your opinionated view is wrong, it's probably better to be a little stubborn for a bit. Like the ability to be
Mhm.
stubborn and be able to revisit your beliefs, to me, feels like the absolute strategy and also operating superpower for companies. Like a lot of companies are
Mm.
just not really opinionated about anything and then not really able to revisit their beliefs. And that puts you in a really bad spot, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Like any kind of new behavior, a big change is going to take some
Yeah.
time. So you need to be Yeah, I'm sure it's a fine line, can be a fine line to walk, and you got to
Right.
have just a lot of self-awareness about where you are in that. One thing you've written a lot about around kind of strategy and thinking about the market context and will this strategy even be successful if even if we could implement it extremely well is around this idea of level of certainty and how companies have to take all these ideas they have, these opinionated views about the world, but they still have to take some amount of like leap of faith that executing on the
Yeah.
strategy will produce good outcomes. Can you talk about that and what you've seen from companies around that?
Yeah. I mean, I think let's just explore some of those topics. This is interesting to me. Hope it's interesting to other people as well. Um, this is how I've been framing it recently. You can't simplify a complex problem. So if you got it, you can choose to hold some things constant. Like let's say you have this crazy family get together and you're trying to decide how to like show up for that, maybe with your partner and your kid as we approach the holidays, for example. You can't just like magically make that problem go away. It's a really complex problem with a bunch of different family members and all sorts of things. So you can't just sort of snap your fingers and make it simple. But you can decide to hold some things constant to be able to make progress. Operating assumptions, right? So you could say, like, look, we're going to operate under the assumption that my dad is really okay as long as we spend a short amount of time with him, but it just has to be quality time. So if my 4-year-old is running around and bouncing off the walls and they don't have like quality time with my dad, he'll feel left out. But we don't need to like spend an amazing amount of time with my dad. So it's kind of walking in with an operating assumption into the family holidays for the in like separated families or whatever. And so that's an example where you have a complex problem and you're holding something constant to be able to make progress. But I think this is related to this particular question you're asking, where the worst is manufactured simplicity or manufactured certainty. It's kind of
Mm,
like, don't overcomplicate it. Just keep it simple. Like it is this simple. It's this simple. And so people are like, okay, I guess it's simple. We'll kind of go in to do that. So I think to get at your question now, I think that the point here is for when you're operating this way is, can you talk about uncertainty with certainty?
mm,
If you just go back to your team and you take the mess and you go back to them with a mess, everyone's cognitive overload is going to go through the roof. Now, if you take a complex problem and you sort of boil it down to something super simple that eliminates all the complexity and you take it to them, they'll be like, great, okay, but you've manufactured certainty. Those ends of the
mhm,
extremes are not what we want, right? We want to be able to go to the
mm,
team and
mhm,
say, classic example here is a slide that has 3 strategy pillars for the year. Option one,
mhm,
CEO goes and says, here's our 3 strategy pillars for the year. And then half the audience is like, I know that one is totally a long shot bet. And two, like there's so much mess behind two, and you kind of lose everyone, right? Now,
mm,
option
mhm,
number 2 is you go and you say to them, oh my God, we have no idea what to do with these 3 problems. They're all so complex. We're never going to make progress on any of them. We have to validate everything. And then what does the audience say? They're just like, oh my God, how are we going to we can't make any progress. The option you want
mhm,
is you want the leader who's going to go up there and say, we have 3 pillars for the next year. The first pillar is our longest bet. And here's the lists of assumptions and areas of uncertainty that we know about. We're going to operate under these following assumptions and assume that these are true and revisit them 6 months from now so we can make progress. These 3 other assumptions I want you to actively validate because we can't make progress if we do that. This third pillar has been a validated motion that we figured out over the last 3-4 years. There's a high level of certainty here. It's built on these facts and assumptions and beliefs that we feel better about. And this is not like motion number one. This is an execute motion. We want to have a real bias to action in this particular space and figure it out. So do you see the difference? Like one is basically going in and manufacturing certainty, you lose everyone. The other one is a
mhm,
situation where you're going in and like loading up everyone with complexity, but with no mental model to like see through the fog. And then the third
mhm,
option is basically like, you're all adults. I'm going to tell you where we have uncertainty and certainty. And I'm going to provide like an opinionated view about how we can hold some things constant here and make progress. And I'm going to put a placeholder 6 months from now where we can revisit those assumptions that I said we're going to operate under. So those are like, hopefully that answers your question in a long way. Like that's what you're looking for, that third option, because that's going to like
mhm.
be the catalyst for their problem solvers on your team. You will have people on your
Gotcha.
team who
Mhm,
are just the just want to operate, just want to execute people. And they would probably be fine with the oversimplified solution. They would be completely paralyzed by the too complex solution. But you're really optimizing for your most passionate problem solvers, and they're going to want option 3. They're going to want the option of being clear, treating them like adults, calling out uncertainty where it exists, and then
Mhm.
agreeing where you're going to hold things constant and make progress. So, yeah,
Yep. No, that makes sense. Sounds like you're basically saying just being honest about the things that you don't know yet, and that's
yeah,
okay. And sometimes we have to work in a scenario where we don't necessarily know if we're doing the right thing, but we're gonna put our head down for 3 to 6 months, and we're gonna work on things,
yeah,
A, B, and C towards that, and we'll see what we learn, and we can
yeah.
adjust from there.
And it's, you
Yep.
do actually do the learning. So I've been telling
Hmm.
teams lately, when anyone talks about, oh, we're running an experiment, I say, put the meeting on the calendar when you will talk about the results of that experiment right now.
Right.
Not like,
Yes.
not like, oh, it's just a little experiment, like you
Mhm.
probably, every company has these, like, oh, Steve, we're gonna do this new community experiment that I really want you to do. And you're like, okay, I think that makes sense. But really at that point, the experiment, you should say, cool. Think, whoever your manager is or whatever, you just say, yeah, that's awesome. I'm going to schedule the follow-up for this experiment right now
Right.
to get
Yeah.
going.
And
So
I know. Yeah, I'm sure everyone here has kind of experienced that. It's just an experiment turns into it gets launched and kind of forgotten about, and the
yeah,
next thing gets worked on.
yeah,
Yep.
exactly.
Okay. Have a ton more questions there, but want to keep moving a little bit. Can you talk a little bit about measuring success in your strategy? How do you think about doing that? It seems like, at the end of the day, your strategy is just kind of the beliefs that you have about how you
Yeah,
can build some medium to long-term sustainable growth for your company.
yeah.
How do you think about the best way to measure your success towards that and the things that you're doing?
Yeah, to me, that there is a balance here between the sort of ivory tower version of analytics and the ivory tower sort of, we've built this 100% foolproof predictive model of success and we've validated everything
Hmm.
with a p-value of all these particular things. There's sort of that version of the world. And then I think that, remember, product is making decisions under conditions of uncertainty. In fact, if you don't have uncertainty in your space, you don't have a business, or you're a commodity business. Any business where you have complete certainty is probably one that's like more of a commodity oriented business. So you have to
Hmm.
think about, the uncertainty is actually a good thing. But to my point, that we're never making decisions, the decision, if you've run an A B test and like one variation wins, that's a pretty, the data helped you make the decision, right? It made you do that. But a lot of the decisions we have to make in product are much more about like, I had a reasonably high certainty of this. I'm getting a couple signals back that that might not be the case. I'm getting a couple signals that there might not be the sort of predicted relationship between these two things that we're doing. What decision do I need to make right now? What available data? What debt bet do I want to play? What are the risks of this bet? What is the upside? Hopefully there's an asymmetric upside compared to the risks, and you have to go. So now bringing it back to measurement and things, I think it's very, very important in your company when you're talking about like evaluative metrics where you believe that you're going to get like a right wrong answer out of the particular thing, and almost like these kind of like decision support, like, are we feeling the environment, that we're sensing the environment that we're in and making progressively better
Hmm.
decisions. So let me try to make it like super actionable, thinking about something like the North Star framework that I talk a lot of. A lot of companies get paralyzed for 6 months because they're like, we haven't, our data scientists haven't been able to unequivocally prove that if you share with 5 people or whatever, you do X, it's going to create revenue. So we can't do this. And I'll say like, well, what, I always say that like powerful ideas imperfectly measured are better than perfect measures for not so powerful ideas. Like, what's the powerful idea you have now? Then once you offer them that question, they're like, well, the powerful idea right now is we're trying to create this flywheel effect between the people who are sharing the content and then the people who are going to kind of like become content sharers themselves. Like, if we can't turn people who are content consumers into content creators, then the whole thing,
Hmm.
the whole gig is off. And I'll be like, so you've spent 6 months rabbit holing on proving this thing when your hypothesis is this future state that can't even necessarily be predicted by existing data, right? So I'm like, okay, you've got a powerful idea. What's your minimally viable measurement for that? It's so funny when you ask it that way. I was like, what would you think you would observe if that was working? Well, The content creator would share the content, and the content consumer would consume the content. And then we would see the content consumer create some content. Brilliant. Brilliant. You're absolutely brilliant. You measure that right now, right? No, no, no. We've been spending the last 6 months debating whether it's share with three, like 3 consumptions or 5 consumptions. So you have no data there to know whatsoever. And so this is the roundabout way of saying that, like, some actionable steps for people is, what are the powerful ideas that you need to be exploring now, stated qualitatively in words? Then, what are the minimally viable measures associated with those things that help you make the decisions that you need to make at the right time, at the right level of detail, at the right decision quality that you need to be able to make it? And then the next
Mhm.
thing is, are you dealing with evaluative measures that are sort of like keep score type measures that you want to
Mhm.
embrace as a keep score type measure? Or are you looking for measures which are more like descriptive, sensing the stones, kind of moving forward to do things? So yeah, maybe you can challenge me for some, I don't know, maybe you have some specific ideas, or we can double click on some of that. But I think that broadly is the problem that I see, is that people get stuck about what they're doing. Are they trying to evaluate the model? Are they trying to inform decisions that they're doing? And at the end of the day, like North Star Framework's a good example. If you have actionable, and people will do this whole data science exercise or whatever and have a North Star, but they won't have any actionable inputs that teams can impact. They're like,
Mm.
we've discovered this predictive metric, or they can predict this other metric going up. Great. What are your team's roadmaps? Oh, I've asked them to ship X, Y, and Z, A, B, and C. Oh, why? Well, because I thought those would be good ideas. Great. How are you going to know if those ideas are working the way you thought? Oh, geez, I don't know. So you can kind of, hopefully those are some North Star related topics that come up with this.
Yeah. As you're kind of talking through that, well, first question that comes to mind is, are there any kinds of like it's like activities or just like workshop
Yeah.
activities that you run that kind of help break this down or simplify this or get people in the right mindset to think about these kinds of things?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll try to, let's see if I can find it super quickly. I have a whole North Star library with 18 exercises you can run in your company right now. Here's two that come to mind that are really helpful. One is called this
Mhm.
kind of bet up activity, which is
Okay.
what you're basically doing is, you're not, the theory of the bet up activity is that your strategy is already in people's heads, and it is represented in the work that you've decided to do. And that
Mhm.
basically, whether you like it or not, that is your current strategy. And so this is a really, really hard statement for here, because people are like, "Oh, what's the new strategy for next year?" I'm like, "Well, what's your strategy right now?" I don't know what our strategy is right now. So in the bed up activity, you just lay out the Jira tickets, or you lay out the tickets on the floor, you lay out some work you've done. And for every single one of those items, you continue to do an activity where, like, we're doing this to increase the likelihood or probability or speed of this. And if that we increase that, we're going to make sure that we decrease or increase that. If we increase that, we're going to make sure we increase or decrease that. And you just keep doing that for all the shit on the floor
Mhm.
until you've basically worked from ground up to what is your,
Mhm.
you make your current strategy or your bets explicit. Now, the other thing is the complete opposite. The complete opposite is to start out with this idea. Here's a very simple activity you can do and just say, like, look, at the end of the day, what are we trying to make possible for this human being? Like, what would awesome look like if we were to imagine, like, this amazing prototypical customer behaving with our product in a way that was completely aligned with our product strategy, in ways that we would be, and I use the technique with them. I'd say, you would literally take $10,000 out of your pocket and put it on the table and say they're going to still be a customer in 3 years. Like, what would challenge you to think about what amazing looks like in terms of the behavior of a customer? So the way you do this activity is, you sort of are going the reverse thing. You're saying, because in the end, like something like North Star, there's one of 5 North Star models. It's either a count of human beings with certain behaviors, a count of accounts with certain behaviors, a key valuable action, a key object, or a key relationship between people. And I can share that with people, or I can find it. So the point there is
Mhm.
that by you reframe the exercise as one of, like, if our strategy was working, what would be possible for the human beings? Like, what would we observe among our best customers and people that we would have extreme confidence that they would go on to be long-term customers? So you see how this flips the
Mhm.
game. The bet up activity is, you just start with the work and then kind of impute the strategy. In this activity,
Right.
you basically think about some future state, you let yourself go wild and think about how would they be behaving with the product, what they're doing. So to give you a very clear example, there's a major automotive company in the United States. They've come up with software that they sell to car dealerships, and the car dealership it helps them price the cars. Normal dealerships just price to move them off the lot. That's the general heuristic. But this company makes software that lets people keep the car on the lot at the price that will make them the most money. Okay, they have a massive database of all the car sales, and they leverage that data. So the funny thing is that this was their sort of new version of the software. 95% of their customers were not using this advanced pricing. The cars were
Mhm.
leaving the lot. They would like access the price from their database and be like, oh, I guess I need to sell it at 12,000 right now off the lot to do it. Now, what they did with their North Star is they set their North Star really aspirationally as the number of car dealerships that were getting within like the top 10 percentile or 15 percentile in the nation of like optimizing their car sales based on prices. It's because they could calculate that.
Mhm.
Once you bought into it, you could calculate that. And then I asked them like, well, how many of your dealerships are doing that now? They're like 5%.
Mm.
But I guess your
Mhm.
business is built on the new version of your business is going to be if you can get more people to do this. It's a wicked problem, right? They're like, yeah, it's a wicked problem. You could tell that that was a powerful North Star. So it was basically like their North Star turned out to be car dealerships that were like optimized car dealerships, like
Mhm.
OCDs. And the
Yeah.
OCDs were
Okay.
like, and so that's the other way to do the activity is to sort of imagine the future state you're looking for your customers and then back your way into it. There's many other
Mhm.
techniques you can see in the template library, but yeah, or if anyone has any questions about a specific one, I'm happy to answer it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. That last one there sounds like just kind of a almost a bit of just common sense, like, if we were to be successful, like, what would be true about our customers kind
Yeah,
of
this is
way
very
of thinking
basic
about it.
stuff but contrast
Mhm.
that with what happens in most companies where it's like I've been battling with the CFO for 6 months now about how to goal the product team, you know?
Mhm.
And here's what you need to know about that discussion. It's no longer about great products anymore. It's not about great product making. It's literally about internal politics. It's about you're
Mm. Mhm.
optimizing for the certainty you have internally for the CFO to go to the product team and say, I think you're creating ROI now or whatever to do that. And so that's what you want to get away from, right? Like you want to think about your customers, your your sort of audacious goals. You want to think about that stuff because the minute that the measures start to run you, you know you're run by the measures. And so that's the important thing.
Mhm.
I leave people with another final point is there's almost three levels to this. There's the powerful idea, there is what you measure and then is a metric. A metric is a combination of measures, often as a ratio or as a period of time. Measures are purely things like we know when this happened at this particular time. It's more like a telemetry view of the world. The powerful idea is what are you trying to measure? So here's the perfect example. You go to a company and they said, yesterday we had 72,000 people bookmark an article. Bookmarks are at 72,000 now, or great. And I'll ask them, okay, great. What is that a proxy for? Now, there's two answers. One is it's a proxy for how many times people bookmark an article. That's not a
Mhm.
proxy. That's about as close as it can get. The powerful idea is bookmark an article. The measure is that they bookmark the article. And then the metric is how many unique people bookmarked the article yesterday. Now, you'll meet another team and they'll be like, oh no, it's a proxy for them loving the content. Ah, so what you're trying to measure is love for the content. Your current proxy
Mhm.
for that is the number of people that bookmarked. The measure is this. And so this is a very, very important concept that when you're dealing with very traditional business metrics, this is much more tightly linked, and net recurring revenue is net recurring revenue. That is a metric. Everyone knows about that. Lots of things around, GMV or all that type of stuff. It's not a proxy. It just is what it is. It's defined and it is what it is. A lot of the things we
Mhm.
measure in product about product behavior or product love or product delight or, you know, stickiness and engagement of the product is like retention is a great example, oh, we have end day retention of this amount. That's not actually kind of as it is, it's not really a proxy for anything. But the next person who says like that means that they love our product. Well, retention is decent for saying that something's happening and getting them come back, but I wouldn't say that that's necessarily like a great signal that they love the product. So you need to think about it that way. I don't know if that was helpful for folks, but it's like, what's the powerful idea? What data must you collect? What must you measure? Like, what phenomena are you measuring? And then how are you taking those measures and turning them into a metric that then you'll use to do it? And so, as simple as that sounds, like a lot of people don't think that way.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's interesting. Do you find that this metric or this measure changes often for people, or
Well,
do you
that's
find
the
that generally
advantage
for a
of this
company?
way. Yeah. So think
Mm.
about something like NRR, those things, these are like metrics that have been proven out over time. And like I said, they're not really a proxy for much. They're not going to really change because the thing you're measuring, the idea, the measures, and the metric are all kind of very close together. Now, if you're doing
Mhm.
something like, so at Amplitude, we have this idea of weekly learning user. Talk about
Yes.
proxies, like learning. What does it mean to be learning? And so, like, if we changed our WLU metric right now, we probably wouldn't change what we're measuring, but let's say we adjusted it to like share with 4, or maybe if you're an enterprise, set the bar here. And if you're a small company, let's say we just change the calculation of the metric. The cool thing is that wouldn't
Mhm.
change the idea. The idea is remaining the same. The idea that like at Amplitude, we're not for an analyst to sit there querying the data in solo mode. We're there for people to actually create insights and then socialize them with their team and help teams be more effective. So do you see how like the idea
Mhm.
stays the same? We might change the
Yes.
metric as we're working. And I think again, when you're talking about these sort of more qualitative or things like delight or these kinds of flywheels that exist, you need to be open to the idea that either your powerful ideas will change or your powerful idea remains the same, but maybe how you're going about measuring it and translating that into metrics changes. So
Yes.
it's a kind of an art and a science.
Yes. Yeah. And as you guys think about what work you're going to be doing over the next few
Yeah.
quarters, do you think about doing work that's going to directly affect weekly, what is it?
Yeah.
Weekly learning
So the way
users,
to,
or because it's
and that's actually, so this is an interesting point. So for the North Star framework, at least, the best North Stars are not directly influenceable by people. You need to influence things that are
mm,
leading indicators into that. And this is like a critical,
mm,
critical point. Because if you gain, let's just think how many ways you could make daily active users going up. If I gave you $10 million, like you could make active users go up. You could just buy users, you can just buy people to show up. So the point is that to get away from that kind of metrics dysfunction, the best approach is what might be called like a driver tree or a graph of inputs and outputs and leading and lagging indicators. Combined, those
mm,
things together give you the balance. It's like a constellation of metrics. And so what happens at that point, I
mm.
think Amazon is really big on this, is actionable metrics. Like it's actually better to have things that teams can impact and then have faith or at least gradually validate that those things are improving success than it is to have these big lagging metrics that are not valuable to people. So you need actionable metrics. So to give you like a very, very specific example, let's just use Amplitude as an example. If our North Star metric is weekly learning users, one of our inputs is called activated accounts, which are accounts that are kind of get data flowing or using the product, have sort of are starting on there's a point where once they're activated, that's good news. But let's say I'm on the
Mhm,
team that works around that. That's a function of the quality of data, the ease of getting data into the system, the ease of onboarding other employees in your team. There's many different like sub inputs on that. So you might have a team that says like, I'm going to reduce the worst case data ingestion time. So from when someone logs in to when they finally get data flowing,
mhm,
the 90th percentile is like 45 days or something. Like, and I'm going
mhm,
to influence that. That's something that you could go and say to a team, I want you to obsess about that for 6 months. It's actionable. I want you to obsess
mhm,
about moving down that 90th percentile number. We have enough people coming in every day that you have multiple shots. You can run experiments like and that's really the key to being outcome focused. So let's talk about outcomes over outputs or,
mhm,
the bet informed roadmap
mhm.
and things. And you can't do that unless the team has a set of things that are more actionable that it can influence. So there's this paradox here between maybe it's not a paradox, but there's this thing of like, you need teams to have something actionable, and then you need to create the causal, at least hypothesis about how that thing relates to sustainable growth and is strategy aligned. So it's kind of the balance of the actionable and the leaps of faith, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that's the thing I'm kind of honing in on here is how do we identify those best, kind of sub inputs that layer up? Like how can we
Well, I think that
find which are the most
what you are
impactful ones?
doing is sort of building a model. So let's just even say let's just take community for an example. You all are in a community. If you did daily active users in a community, it's not really very valuable because there could be new users, there could be people. So let's just say that we have this idea of an engaged community member, like an ECM. And an ECM are people who are, within the last 7 days who are doing high value community actions and are actually engaging in the community in a way that's like congruent with our strategy to be able to do it. So if you have a user generated content motion, maybe you make it hard on yourself and you're just like, one of the high value actions is contributing content back into the Launch Awesome community. Okay, so that's your ECM,
Hmm.
these engaged community members. Now that's an example of one where it's like, hey, Steve, increase CMs this week. If you say like, scratch your head, that's a good sign because it means that it might be a good North Star. Like you'd have to think about what you want to influence. So then maybe you,
Hmm.
Steve, are sort of say like, look, right now we're just at that stage where when we get 50 people to show up for anything with 3 days notice. Like once you have a community, it's good because usually like you can just put something in the programming and people will show up. So it's like you lower the lead times, you lower the promotion you need to do, and it sort of has this thing. And then you say, but those activities need to be engaging. So like for this event that we're on right now, someone should ask me a question and then it would qualify for an event where we're engaging the audience. Okay. So that's something you can control. So I might say, Steve,
Hmm.
like in the next quarter, even if it just feels very output oriented, if it's like, what can you can control? Well, you can control the number of like vibrant events that we program.
Hmm.
And you say, look, I'm going to try to knock out like 15 vibrant events in the next quarter up from 7 the previous quarter. And so even though that feels kind of output oriented and not like, well, that's not a metric or whatever, but 10's our definition of vibrant events, it is definitely an input in your mental model. Like if you can't get, community is largely about the ability to attract people into the community, keep them in the community, engage them in the community, and then create flywheel effects in a community. So those are your levers.
Hmm.
You can attract people, you can
Hmm.
engage them, you can do that. So do you see how I'm just even walking through in the context of community, thinking about like what would be more actionable, and that's really what I'm doing is sort of building almost like a causal map for that. And one of the very actionable thing anyone can do is listening is basically like use this phrasing, like our ability to foster an engaging community is a function of our ability to. And then you
Yes.
can list some
Yes, I
things. So
love
then you
that.
could be like, our ability to do this thing is a function of our ability to communicate the value of our community. I think, community is like people, content, experience, and technology. So, is our function about being able to match people with the right content and then provide a great experience for them with the right technology so that they
Hmm.
come back. So that would be like how you structure it. And in a lot of things like
Yep.
education and community, the thing is that like some of these things might not be perfectly causal. They might not be perfectly set like that, but it's more like you're inviting your company to take the leap of faith with you that at least the ideas are powerful.
Yes.
Another, just like belabor the point with one more community thing, is that like you might have someone in your company that's just thinking like they don't really understand community. I'm just using community so you understand, but with product is the same thing. Like someone in your company just doesn't get it. Like, why don't you just build this stuff? The same thing for community would be like, I don't know, Lenny has a community of 250,000 people. Like, Steve, like, how hard could it be? And you're like, well, community is really hard. You've got to foster these things. You've got to foster this environment. And, launch notes, do we go after product managers or PMMs or anyone? It's a cross-functional group. This is messy. And
Hmm.
by creating these models, you're creating shared understanding with your team about what's involved, right? So like instead
Hmm.
of saying, your boss could say, I just need to know community metrics and that's it. What are you going to be gold on? So you go to the internet or GPT chat or whatever, and you're like community metrics. And they're like, well, active community
Yeah.
metrics. That doesn't tell you
Mhm.
anything about like the unique nature of your strategy right now. So that's the advantage of building these particular models as you do it and giving yourself some inputs.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay. Well, cool. Thanks so much for that. That's great. Okay. I want to, oh man, there's so much more I want to talk about, but I know we have a bunch of questions that people have been asking that I want to get into as well. Blake's actually going to start dropping a couple in the screen and I can read them out for you.
I think, oh, okay, yeah. Oh, but yeah.
Cool.
Okay. From Shutterstock asks, do you have any advice on meaningful metrics for internet tools? When we
I think
say
that's
internet,
internal tools.
oh, internal tools. Oh, great. Oh, sorry. Yeah,
Yes.
my glasses are bad right here to these things.
All good.
Yeah. So here's the interesting thing about internal tools. It works the same way in
Mm.
that a great example is Optimizely, for example. Optimizely a couple years ago had some inputs like, drive experiment maturity was one of their key inputs. I think the second one was something like get people just running more experiments. So can we get them to run more experiments and can we get them to mature in their practice of experimentation? Now, one of their other inputs was deliver enterprise grade software. It's just like they realize that there is like a set of things they need to do. They need reliable software. They want their stuff to maybe conform with the DORA report and like DORA metrics.
Mm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
they want like mean time to recovery. They want data to flow. They want all those things. So the important thing here too is if you think about internal tools as products, like let's say you and I have a design system, Talita, we would ask the question about like, well, if we were successful with our design system, what would that enable people to do? Well, it might offer, like, it would increase developer productivity. It would increase consistency without subsequent increase in time it takes to get features done. It would enable redesigns when we need to be able to do the redesign. We'd probably, long bet is maybe we'd keep our employees longer because it would be joyful to work at the particular company. And ultimately too, we would test usability heuristics and present the best widgets so that our teams didn't need to rethink widgets and widget design. Like we've already tested that modal. We know it works. Okay. So you go through those particular things. And then if you're on the design system team, it's like, okay, all that stuff is great. And maybe that represents the North Star. Like our North Star is productive front-end developer. Productive front-end developer is a person who is writing minimal custom components and is accessing our design system and using it as code in their code and in a high percentage of the time. Awesome. You're trying to make that human. Awesome. Then you have to think, well, what levers do you control as a design system team? Well, it's both the coverage of the design system so someone can access it. It's the quality of the design system, which is like, are the components working and are they usable for the user? It's the quality of the components in terms of usable for the developer. And then it's your advocacy internally within the group. I know this because I did a design system North Star workshop just recently. Okay. So then as you do that particular thing, like those are things you can action. And so, yeah, that's pretty much like an example of what you could do with any internal tool is first you start with the human out in the world and you create a map of like realistically, how does the humans at Shutterstock benefit from the work we're doing on this internal tool? And maybe it's just like, well, we're helping our developers learn, like let's say data. At Amplitude, we advise any data team that adopts Amplitude to set a North Star of better bets, which is your goal in using Amplitude is not to answer questions. It's literally to raise the quality of the bets that you place for your customers. And so that's the North Star. The inputs are like quality data, speed of insights, and then your ability to collaborate. So question for you. How do you think about best practices for connecting different product areas? And in large orgs to align with the same act. When is it good to have a single North Star? So my point here, I get asked this a lot and the answer is really short. Challenge the need to have multiple North Stars because often you're shipping your org chart. And so often you're shipping your org chart and customers don't care that you have 4 different departments. They think to themselves, like, I just love your product and I use it. Great example is a bank. The bank does not want to know that Citibank has 250 different product areas. They just want their financial life being taken care of. So what you have to be careful with the multiple North Star problem is that you're actually reinforcing bad behavior internally without like keeping the customer in mind for what you're doing. So in the settings where it's a big company, but where they really are working to benefit one particular type of customer, it's sort of one product. You might want to use multiple sets of inputs, like one North Star with a layer of inputs and then layers of inputs next to those. And usually then you could accommodate. Here's a very quick example. Let's say that you are SoundCloud and you're divided into the creator teams and the fan teams. It would be tempting to be like, well, we've got, and maybe Patreon could be the patrons and the patrons. Like it could be two-sided. It would be tempting to be like, well, we need a North Star for that team and we need a North Star for the other team. Now, if you're SoundCloud, imagine though that your North Star could be healthy fan artist connections. Whoa, that's a really cool North Star because you're trying to connect fans with artists. Then you could have inputs related to that is a function of your ability to like make and like break new creators and give them the tools they need to create, and also attract new fans and then connect fans and artists. You could imagine the inputs would be like that. So challenge the need for multiple North Stars. And usually that is sometimes a clue that you just have more inputs into what you're doing.
That's really interesting. Yeah, it seems like I bet a lot of companies have this kind of dual, almost like dual audience situation going on. But the reality is like the value to and either one of those isn't what you're actually like
In
selling.
multi-sided
It's the
marketplaces,
interplay.
yeah. In multi-sided
Mhm.
marketplaces, that's why I mentioned those 5 models of North Star, like humans, accounts, actions, options, and the last one is relationships. That's why we have one of those.
Mhm.
For multi-sided marketplaces, you're really about fostering healthy relationships between the 2 sides of the market. That's where it gets interesting.
Yes.
Okay, Jack Allen
Yes.
from SciSense asks, North Star should typically not be revenue, but often this metric most resonates with execs. What are ways of successfully coaching executives to follow a North Star instead of a revenue? Don't try to get them to pick one or the other. Just draw the graph out. Your goal is not to tell them not to care about revenue. Your goal is to tell them and create a persuasive story about how the actions you're doing now will create sustainable revenue for now and time to come. So it's much more a way of saying like, great that you're caring about revenue. Thank you for caring about revenue. Otherwise, we wouldn't have revenue. But we could all agree that revenue is both an oddly leading indicator and a lagging indicator. You can pump up revenue this quarter if you want, that's leading. And the revenue you're experiencing now is the cumulative revenue of all the product decisions you've made over the last 3 to 5 years. That's the problem with revenue. It's a great metric for some people, but it's not a very helpful product metric because it doesn't help you make these long-term decisions. And so the goal there is to actually kind of build a bridge with them. Your North Star, if we do the North Star right, what would we expect in terms of business results? Sustainable revenue. We would expect this. We might expect to be able to expand our market. We might expect a lower cost of acquisition. We might be able to do increase customer lifetime value. We might need to be better positioned in the market because of that. So don't try to tell them to follow something else. Your job is to like create the story of how a great product strategy deployed will get them the financial results now and then financial results in the future that they want.
Yeah, that one's really interesting. One thing that comes to mind when you say that is it almost feels like the time horizon of the metric you're focusing on kind of almost kind of depends on the level you're at within the company. Like
Yeah.
maybe the CEO just is more focused on revenue and the head of product is more focused on a North Star metric and the
Yeah.
PM on a given pod is more focused on one of the inputs that kind of feed into that North Star
Yeah.
metric.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
interesting.
And so I think that that's a great, awesome way to put it. What are your predictions for how things will change for product teams in 2023? I don't know. I don't know. All bets are off now. I'll ask Chat GPT what it thinks and then answer why you're saying. No, I mean there's going to be a lot of turmoil on teams. There's like a lot of turnover on teams as
Mhm.
people are looking for different things. A lot of people kind of cooked over the last couple years. Um, questioning. There's a lot of sort of questioning of like core businesses that they thought, it's going to be a $10 billion business. Like, no, it's probably like a $600 million business or market, right? And so I think that it's tough to say exactly what's going to happen. I think that people, I mean, just this discussion of people where like, I've been in discussions in the last 2 weeks of people are saying, well, we're really seriously thinking about consolidating the tools that we're using. Like, is it really helping us to have all these different tools? We sort of gave our PM teams like a blank check to go out and like write, use everything and anything, but is it really helping us the way we expect? That's the challenge that I see.
Yes. Yep. I can
So if
definitely
you're a
echo
maker of
that.
those tools, you might have those particular challenges, but also if you're on those teams, you might have that challenge as well. I really wonder for a lot of teams, like how much process overhead is really all that necessary. I think a lot of I mean, maybe it'll also help teams question, just they want to be more efficient and productive. And maybe they will force them to kind of question like what rituals are really important and what rituals aren't. Like to the point of something like launch notes and stuff that like I think everyone could agree that especially if you can create a step change in how you communicate about what you build, this is like ever present problem, especially the faster you ship. The faster you ship, the bigger of a problem this is. So like that's like some place to focus. Hopefully analytics is some place to focus, but sort of other things we could talk about. Cool.
Okay. All right. Well, cool. Would love to keep going, but that's all we have time for today. So just want to say a huge thank you. I know you're a busy guy, so really appreciate your time. One last reminder, these events are put on by the Launch Awesome community. Blake's going to drop one more link in there right now. So make sure to join if you want to hear about future events and come hang out with us. John, thanks again. Where can folks find you and connect?
Good bet would be, Substack. I mean, email is nice. Like at least if something happens to me, I can always contact you over email, even if it's so the newsletter, the beautiful mess thing is a good place to do that. And then LinkedIn and other stuff. Twitter, I don't know if you use Twitter, but like for example, the number of people even interacting there, at least for me, has dropped significantly by,
Mm.
50 to
Oh,
75%. So I
interesting.
don't know if it's
Okay.
just the crew or just overall overload or some other things that happen, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. If nothing else, can't recommend his Substack highly enough. It's great. So check that out. Alrighty. Well, cool. Thanks
Cool.
so much, John.
All right, my pleasure. Yeah,
And
thanks. All right,
we'll
check.
see
All
ya.
right.
Yep.
Okay, bye-bye.